At exactly 2:13 a.m., the digital clock on the nightstand flickered. Emily Carter opened her eyes to total darkness, instantly aware that the bed beside her felt empty. Then she heard it, a quiet, raspy whisper coming from under the heavy down blanket. Daniel was whispering a woman's name, not Emily, not the name of the woman who had stood beside him at the altar 15 years ago. In the pale, ghostly glow of his phone screen, Emily stayed motionless, her breath catching in her throat. Her body went entirely numb as the words slipped through his lips. Soft, tender, and completely damning. "I'll leave her soon, I promise." Her heart didn't just break, it stopped. A second later, Daniel locked his phone, slid it under his pillow, and rolled over. He casually reached across the bed, kissed Emily's bare shoulder as if nothing was wrong, and fell back asleep. His rhythmic, calm breathing filled the room. Emily lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the shadows on the ceiling until the sun came up. She was listening to the breathing of a man who looked like her husband, but had suddenly become a total stranger. She had no idea that before the week was over, one of them would lose everything. To anyone looking from the outside, Daniel Carter was the golden standard of an American husband. He was a talented architect, a weekend volunteer soccer coach, and a devoted father to their 12-year-old daughter, Sophie. Every Sunday morning, the kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup as Daniel made animal-shaped pancakes for Sophie. Every anniversary, a massive bouquet of long-stem roses arrived at the front door. Every December, he was the first on the block to carefully line their warm, two-story home with festive lights. The Carters were the living definition of the suburban dream. But perfection is often just a performance, with good lighting. At breakfast that morning, Emily sat across from Daniel, watching him pour black coffee into his travel mug. His hair was slicked back. His designer suit fitted impeccably. "Big meeting today?" Emily asked, keeping her voice completely neutral. Daniel looked up, offering that warm, familiar smile that had swept her off her feet in college. "Yeah, huge client pitch downtown. I'll probably be home late, honey. Don't wait up." The lie slipped out of his mouth so effortlessly, so smoothly, that it terrified her far more than the whisper under the blanket had. For 15 years, she had accepted his word as gospel. Now, every small movement felt calculated. The heavy splash of expensive cologne before leaving, the sudden obsessive trips to the gym late at night, the deliberate way he placed his smartphone face down on the marble countertop every time he entered a room. Sophie bounced down the stairs, her backpack heavy over one shoulder. "Dad, are you coming to my piano recital on Friday? I've been practicing every day." Daniel leaned down, kissing his daughter's forehead. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo." Emily caught it, a micro fraction of a second where his eyes flickered, his voice dropping just a fraction, a tiny crack in the armor. Emily spent the rest of the day trying to talk herself out of the nightmare. She cleaned the kitchen 3 times. She tried to convince herself she had misheard him in the dark. Maybe he was talking about a difficult client. Maybe she had been dreaming. Then at 2:15 p.m., her phone buzzed on the counter. An automated bank alert popped up on the screen. $487.63, the Grand Harbor Hotel. Emily stared at the numbers. The Grand Harbor was a boutique luxury hotel in the heart of downtown. Just last Thursday, Daniel had told her he was staying overnight at his architecture firm's office to push through a tight deadline for a city project. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she opened their joint banking app. She didn't just look at Thursday. She scrolled back through months of transaction logs. The evidence didn't lie. $500 dinners on Tuesday nights. High-end jewelry boutiques. Continuous rideshare receipts to a residential neighborhood across the river. A neighborhood Daniel had no professional reason to ever visit. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a clear, undeniable trail of breadcrumbs. When Daniel walked through the front door that evening, carrying brown paper bags from Emily's favorite upscale Italian restaurant, he looked like the ultimate family man. Thought my favorite girls deserved a night off from cooking, he beamed, setting the food on the table. Across the dinner table, Sophie chattered excitedly about school projects, while Daniel chimed in with perfect timing, laughing at all the right moments. Emily forced food down her throat, watching her husband with a chilling realization. He wasn't tortured by guilt. He wasn't struggling to keep his secret straight. He was utterly, completely comfortable. 3 days later, Emily broke the unspoken rule of her marriage. She followed him. At 5:42 p.m., Daniel walked out of his office building, adjusted his coat, and got into his sedan. Instead of turning right toward the highway that led to their quiet suburban home, he turned left, heading toward the revived waterfront district. Emily stayed 3 cars behind, her palms slick against the steering wheel, her pulse hammering in her ears like a drum. He pulled up outside a trendy waterfront cafe and put the car in park. Seconds later, a woman in a bright red coat stepped out into the chilly air. She smiled, walked up to Daniel as he stepped out of his car, and wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. Daniel pulled her close. He kissed her, not with hesitation, but with the deep, effortless familiarity of a man who had done this 100 times before. Inside her car, Emily felt the air leave her lungs. 15 years of shared holidays, hospital visits, house mortgages, and bedtime stories collapsed into a single, brutal image. Every instinct screamed at her to throw open her car door, run across the asphalt, and tear them apart. She wanted to scream until her lungs bled. Instead, her hands reached for her phone. Snap, snap, snap. Her camera caught every detail: the embrace, the kiss, the warm smile he reserved only for moments of deep affection. Emily wiped a bitter tear from her cheek before it could drop. Deep down, a cold, quiet logic took over. Emotions disappear in courtrooms, but evidence endures. Over the next 7 days, Emily turned her life into a quiet operation. She cooked meals, helped Sophie with long division, and laid beside Daniel every night, staying perfectly still while he slipped into the master bathroom at 1 a.m. to type secret messages. Using the address from his rideshare history, she drove to a modern apartment building overlooking the river. She walked into the sleek lobby under the guise of inquiring about open units. The concierge, a young man behind a marble desk, smiled politely. "I think my cousin's friend lives here," Emily said casually. "Daniel Carter? Apartment 4B. "Oh, yeah, Mr. Carter." The concierge nodded naturally. "He's usually in during the evenings. His girlfriend usually gets here a bit later, though." Girlfriend. The word landed heavier than the photos had. Daniel hadn't just made a drunk mistake at a conference. He had established a full, functional second life. He was paying rent on a hidden sanctuary, while Emily was budgeting for Sophie's orthodontic bills. Knowing she needed undeniable proof, Emily hired Marcus Reed, a private investigator with 20 years of experience as a police detective. Marcus was a man of few words, with graying hair and an unreadable expression. A week after taking the case, Marcus met Emily at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He slid a thick beige folder across the laminate table. Inside were high-resolution photographs, bank transfers, hotel check-in logs, and lease agreements. "Mrs. Carter, there's something else," Marcus said, his deep voice dropping an octave. He pulled out a single photograph of the woman in the red coat. "Her name is Vanessa Brooks, 34 years old, independent marketing consultant, divorced." Emily stared at the woman's face. "Is she his mistress?" Marcus leaned in. "Here's the twist. She has no idea your husband is married." Emily stared at him, stunned. "What?" "I ran a background check and talked to a discreet source close to her," Marcus explained. "Daniel told her he's been divorced for over 2 years. He told her his ex-wife moved across the country to Seattle. According to her inner circle, Daniel has been talking to her about selling her condo so they can buy a house together." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The anger in her chest shifted into something far stranger. Daniel wasn't just betraying his wife. He was spinning an elaborate web of deception around 2 entirely separate women, manipulating both of their futures for his own ego. Using a burn email address, Emily reached out to Vanessa, posing as a potential corporate client looking for marketing strategy. They agreed to meet at a quiet, upscale coffee shop downtown. When Vanessa walked in, Emily felt a pang of unexpected shock. Vanessa wasn't a cartoonish villain or a ruthless homewrecker. She was an ordinary woman who looked exhausted, carrying a designer bag and a laptop, her eyes showing the quiet hope of someone who believed she had finally found the love of her life. They ordered tea. They made polite professional conversation for 10 minutes. Then Emily reached into her handbag. Without a word, she slid a framed family photo across the small wooden table. It showed Daniel, standing on a beach during their last summer vacation, his arms wrapped tightly around Emily and Sophie, all 3 of them laughing into the camera. Vanessa stared at the photo. Her smile slowly melted away. I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "That's my husband," Emily said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding against her ribs. "And that's our 12-year-old daughter." Silence descended on the table like a heavy fog. Vanessa's hands began to shake violently. She fumbled with her phone, unlocked it, and pulled up a recent photo. Daniel standing in front of a sleek high-rise apartment, popping a bottle of champagne, smiling the exact same smile. He told me he was single," Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking as tears filled her eyes. "He told me his ex-wife moved to Washington years ago. He showed me divorce papers." "They were forged," Emily said quietly. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emily didn't feel alone in her grief. Looking across at Vanessa, she saw her own shock reflected back at her. They were 2 women standing on opposite ends of the exact same bridge of lies. Vanessa looked up, wiping a tear from her cheek. "What are you going to do?" Emily took a long, slow breath. "I'm going to make sure he pays for every single lie. Are you in?" Vanessa looked at the engagement ring catalog on her phone screen, swallowed hard, and nodded. "Tell me what to do." Friday evening arrived, the night of Sophie's piano recital. The school auditorium was packed with parents holding flowers, cameras, and programs. Emily sat in the second row, saving the empty seat beside her. She checked her watch every 30 seconds. 7 p.m., no sign of Daniel. 7:10 p.m. The auditorium lights dimmed, still an empty seat. Sophie walked out onto the stage in her blue dress, holding her music sheets. She scanned the audience, her bright eyes searching row by row for her father's face. When she realized the seat beside her mother was vacant, her shoulders slumped slightly, but she took her seat at the grand piano and began to play. Right then, Emily's phone vibrated in her lap. A text from Marcus. He just entered the waterfront apartment. He brought wine. Vanessa is meeting him inside. Emily looked at her innocent daughter pouring her heart out into the piano keys on stage, completely abandoned by the man who had promised he wouldn't miss it for the world. In that precise second, something inside Emily died, and something far more dangerous took its place. The grief evaporated. The sadness vanished. Her heart turned to ice-cold resolve. This was no longer about a broken marriage. It was about protecting her child from a predator disguised as a father. Sophie finished her piece to thunderous applause. Emily stood up, cheering louder than anyone in the room. But when they walked out to the car afterward, and Sophie looked up with sad eyes asking, "Did Dad get stuck in traffic again?" Emily couldn't bring herself to cover for him anymore. She wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Let's go get ice cream, sweetie. Just you and me." As they drove into the warm summer night, Emily looked in the rearview mirror and made a silent vow. Daniel Carter thought he was the smartest man in every room. He had no idea his entire world was about to be burned to the ground. The very next morning, Vanessa texted Emily, "Meet me. You need to see what I found." They met in Vanessa's car parked in a quiet suburban alley. Vanessa pulled a small, dark velvet box from her purse and opened it. Inside sat a glittering 2-carat diamond ring. "He left it in his coat pocket last night," Vanessa said, her voice shaking with rage. "The receipt was inside the box. He bought it 3 weeks ago. He was planning to propose on my birthday next month." Emily looked at the receipt. Daniel had used funds from their joint emergency savings account to buy his mistress an engagement ring. "I feel so stupid," Vanessa sobbed, resting her head against the steering wheel. "Don't," Emily said, laying a hand on her shoulder. "He spent years perfecting this. He manipulated both of us. But he made one fatal mistake. He assumed we would never talk." Later that afternoon, Marcus Reed called with an urgent update. "Mrs. Carter, I ran a deeper financial background search on your husband's past. You need to sit down." Emily gripped her phone tightly. "What did you find?" "This isn't his second affair," Marcus revealed. "It's his fourth. Over the last 8 years, I found paper trails linked to 3 other women in different surrounding cities. Expensive dinners, short-term luxury rentals, promises of marriage, and then he abruptly cuts them off and disappears." Emily felt sick. "He's a serial predator." "It gets worse," Marcus added. "I pulled your home equity records. 18 months ago, a secondary lien was placed on your house for $185,000. Daniel forged your signature on the authorization paperwork." Emily felt the room tilt. "He mortgaged our home." "Yes. He funneled the cash into a shell company he registered as Carter Design Solutions. He's been using your house as collateral to fund his luxury lifestyle and keep his mistresses happy. If the bank called in that loan, Emily and Sophie wouldn't just lose Daniel. They would lose the roof over their heads. That Saturday, Daniel insisted on throwing a lavish backyard barbecue for their neighbors and colleagues. He wore an apron, flipped steaks, and poured craft beer, beaming as neighbors complimented his immaculate lawn. "You're a lucky woman, Emily," an elderly neighbor remarked, sipping punch. "Daniel is one of the good ones. They don't make men like him anymore." Emily forced a sweet smile. "No, they certainly don't." At dusk, Daniel clinked his glass with a fork, gathering everyone's attention. "I just want to raise a toast," he said, looking around warmly. "To family, to good friends, and to the home we've built together." Everyone cheered. Daniel leaned over and wrapped his arm around Sophie, pulling her close. Emily watched him. horrified by how effortlessly he wore the mask of an innocent father while secretly gambling away his daughter's future. Outside on the street, Marcus Reed sat silently inside his tinted SUV, logging every guest who entered. At 11:47 p.m., after the last guest had left, Daniel's phone rang. He immediately muted it, checked to see if Emily was in the kitchen, and stepped out onto the back patio. Emily slipped quietly behind the thick curtains near the glass sliding doors, keeping her breath shallow. Daniel's voice was hushed, sharp, and laced with venom. "I told you never to call this number. No, you are not getting another dime. If you open your mouth to anyone, I swear to God, I've already paid you enough to keep quiet." He slammed his thumb down to end the call, running both hands through his hair. He stood under the porch light for a full minute, breathing heavily. When he turned back around to walk inside, the effortless confidence was gone. For the first time in 15 years, Daniel Carter looked genuinely terrified. Someone was blackmailing him. The next afternoon, Marcus followed Daniel to a secure storage facility on the industrial side of town. Security footage Marcus later obtained showed Daniel entering Unit 314. 40 minutes later, he walked out holding a heavy, hard-shell black briefcase secured with a combination lock. He scanned the parking lot nervously before sliding it into his trunk. Simultaneously, Vanessa used her spare key to enter Daniel's waterfront apartment while he was at work. She searched his home office desk, prying open a locked bottom drawer with a screwdriver. Inside, she didn't find financial papers. She found a leather pouch containing an alternate passport with Daniel's face under a different name, along with 3 fake driver's licenses showing different addresses across 3 states. When Emily and Marcus met Vanessa at her apartment later that evening to look at the fake identities, the full picture finally came into focus. "He isn't just cheating," Marcus declared, examining the passports under a bright light. "He's building a completely clean exit strategy. When his debts catch up with him, he's planning to erase his identity and run." Before anyone could speak, Emily's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown, untraceable number. She put it on speaker. "Hello?" A heavy, calm male voice echoed through the room. "Mrs. Carter." "Who is this?" Emily demanded. "My name doesn't matter," the voice replied coldly. "I'm only going to ask you one question. Does your husband still have the black briefcase?" Emily looked at Marcus, her chest heaving. "Who are you?" "If he still has that briefcase," the stranger warned, "you and your daughter need to get out of that house tonight. He owes people who don't take cases to court." The line went dead. The clock was ticking. Instead of fleeing, Emily met with the city's most formidable divorce attorney, an elderly woman named Eleanor Vance, who was famous for tearing unfaithful spouses to pieces in court. Eleanor reviewed the stack of evidence: the financial fraud, the secret apartment, the forged home equity loan, the fake IDs, and the photos of Daniel's affairs. "Mrs. Carter," Eleanor said, folding her hands over the desk, "do you want to settle this quietly, or do you want blood?" Emily looked at the photo of Sophie, sleeping peacefully in her bedroom. "I want him to never be able to hurt my daughter again." Eleanor smiled grimly. "Then we won't serve him at home. We will strike when he feels completely untouchable." The opportunity presented itself 3 days later. Daniel's architecture firm announced a massive gala at a 5-star hotel downtown to celebrate landing a multi-million-dollar city development project. Over 200 high-profile guests, city officials, investors, and media figures were invited. Daniel was ecstatic. He bought himself a new tuxedo and insisted Emily wear an expensive evening gown. "It's the biggest night of my life, Em," he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "Everything I've worked for comes down to tonight." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Emily replied softly. Across town, Vanessa was getting dressed in a matching black dress. The hotel ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, live classical music played, and champagne flowed freely. Daniel moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands with city council members and wealthy investors, taking full credit for the firm's success. At 9 p.m., the CEO of the firm took the main stage microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring up the lead architect behind this incredible milestone, Daniel Carter." The room erupted into applause. Daniel walked onto the stage, beaming, taking his place behind the podium. "Thank you," Daniel began, flashing his winning smile. "Success in life isn't just about hard work. It's about integrity. It's about trust, dedication, and building a foundation that lasts a lifetime." From the front row, Emily stood up. She carried a sleek black flash drive in her hand. She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. She simply walked up the side stairs of the stage and approached the AV technician, controlling the giant presentation screens behind the podium. "Here is the updated executive slideshow," Emily whispered politely to the tech, handing him the drive. The technician plugged it in. Daniel stopped speaking mid-sentence as the giant 20-foot screens behind him flickered. The crowd's chatter slowly died down. Instead of architectural blueprints, a massive high-definition photo illuminated the ballroom. Daniel kissing Vanessa outside the waterfront apartment. Gas rippled through the audience. Daniel turned around, his eyes going wide with terror. What is that? Tech, turn that off!" Before anyone could react, the slideshow automatically advanced. The next slide showed the forged $185,000 home equity agreement. Then came the bank statements showing joint family funds being funneled into secret accounts. Then came the photos of his 3 fake driver's licenses and alternate passport. "Emily, what are you doing?" Daniel hissed off mic, his face draining of all color. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Vanessa walked down the central aisle, wearing a striking black gown. The entire room turned to watch her. She walked right up to the stage, climbed the steps, and stood directly beside Emily. Vanessa took the diamond engagement ring from her purse and slammed it down onto the podium right next to Daniel's notes. "For the record," Vanessa announced clearly into the secondary microphone, her voice echoing through the entire ballroom, "he told me his wife was dead." The room descended into total chaos. Investors began whispering frantically. The CEO of the firm put his head in his hands. City officials immediately stood up and walked toward the exits. Emily walked up to Daniel, who was trembling, clutching the edges of the podium as his entire carefully constructed illusion shattered into dust before 200 of the most influential people in the city. She leaned in close to his ear, her voice as smooth as ice. "The police and the FBI are waiting in the lobby for that black briefcase in your trunk, Daniel. Happy anniversary." The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Exposed as a fraud, Daniel's firm terminated his employment within 24 hours. Facing charges of bank fraud, forgery, and identity theft tied to his offshore accounts, he spent his savings on criminal defense lawyers instead of luxury apartments. Eleanor Vance decimated him in civil court. Emily was awarded full physical custody of Sophie, along with the remaining equity from their asset liquidations. The house was sold, allowing Emily to clear the fraudulent mortgage and secure a comfortable financial cushion to start over. Daniel moved into a dreary, one-bedroom basement apartment on the outskirts of the city. His luxury vehicle was repossessed. His high society friends erased his number from their phones. He was left with nothing but his own reflection in an empty room. 6 months after the trial, Daniel sat across from Sophie at a diner for his court-monitored visitation hour. He tried to play the cool dad, talking about movies and asking about her friends, but Sophie sat quietly, pushing her food around her plate. Finally, she looked up at him with clear, honest eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetie," Daniel asked, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Why weren't we enough for you?" Daniel froze. All his smooth talk, all his charm, all his rehearsed excuses melted away. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized the true magnitude of what he had destroyed. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he managed to choke out. Sophie looked at him gently, but didn't take his hand. "I know you're sorry, Dad, but I don't know who you are anymore." 2 years later, Emily stood under the bright morning sun at Sophie's middle school graduation. They lived in a warm, modest cottage near the coast now. It wasn't a mansion, but it was filled with light, laughter, and genuine peace. As the crowd cheered for the graduates, Emily spotted Daniel standing far at the back of the lawn, wearing a plain coat, watching his daughter receive her diploma from a distance. He didn't come closer. He didn't try to intrude. When Sophie walked out with her diploma, she caught her father's eye across the field. She gave him a small, polite nod, acknowledgement of the past, but a clear boundary for the future. Daniel nodded back, wiped his eyes, and quietly turned around, walking away into the crowd alone. Emily took her daughter's hand, feeling the strength and resilience they had built together. Daniel Carter had spent his life believing he could betray everyone and escape the consequences. But in the end, he learned the ultimate truth. A man who lives a lie will eventually wake up to find he has no one left to tell it to.